sorry, just a comment. This is another one where I think, again, Indonesia's already in the ball court, so to speak, moving ahead well. They have recently. There's a presidential initiative for what's called the SRCPB. It's a Indonesian Rapid Response and Assistance Force. We think about routine to crisis. The crisis will more quickly emerge at the local government level because they're going to have less capacity, for example. So you'll see routine to crisis happening a lot more quickly at the provincial and or kabupaten level, where the disaster management authorities there are finding it difficult to cope with a disaster because they're victims of a disaster themselves. What the SRC is it will be a multidisciplinary civil-military force that conceptually will have a range of skill base and be standby to be deployed within hours of a major event where we can see that crisis happening. The only difference really with what you laid down before is that there obviously has to be a command system instead of an emerging command. There will be a system of command, but the idea will be to build this force into a force of specialists that would assist in that very early crisis, hours to days post-event, and I actually commend it. I think it's a good step forward.
Other comments or questions? Let me push forward, and I will be faster in going through these things. Don't despair that you will be here until 10 o'clock at night. A second core problem of disaster response is the problem of scaling up operations, having a surge of capacity that will let you deal with a much bigger situation than you have prepared for. You faced that in the extreme with the tsunami. Major earthquakes can pose equally demanding situations as China experienced with the Wenchuan earthquake, and as you probably have as well. And this problem is exacerbated because disasters frequently happen in relatively less inhabited parts of a country or in places where capacity is much weaker than they are in some other parts of the country, or even if they happen in very populous places with well-developed disaster capabilities, a major disaster will cause so much damage and so many casualties that it will exceed even the best prepared organizations. As I say in the slide, no local or jurisdiction, or even at the provincial level, or perhaps even at the national level, can maintain the expense of putting in place all of the capacity, the people, equipment, etc., that would be needed to deal with the largest kind of emergency they would ever face. They have to have some method of getting resources from places where they are lodged to the place where a disaster occurs. This is a huge problem. Thank you very much. Coffee would be good. Thank you. This is a very difficult problem, and one that I heard in the comments this morning. I heard Indonesia is beginning to think about in the same way that a number of other places are. There are quite a few ways of dealing with this. Stockpiling of materials for disaster response and for relief. This could be true for either physical disasters or medical disasters. There may be methods of transporting things very rapidly. There may be ways of triaging victims so that instead of bringing capacity to the place that the organization where the disaster occurs, we take less injured people away from that place to where there are more resources. There are strategies for having less stringent requirements for the quality of care under emergency conditions. In the United States and in a number of other countries in the West, there are very strict restrictions on who can give what kinds of medical care. Certain things can be done only by doctors. Different kinds of nurses are allowed to do limited things, not other things. Under disaster circumstances, you may well need somebody who doesn't have a medical degree or license to do something that under ordinary circumstances only a doctor would be allowed to do. Thinking those things through in advance, figuring out how those might be relaxed, thinking about other ways of covering it. Are there retired people who have stepped out of medical service who could come back into it for a disaster? In the United States, some women begin as nurses and then take time off to have children, come back to the workforce and do something different than being a nurse. Can we have procedures for maintaining their certification and having them ready to be reserve nurses under disaster conditions? Very wide range of things of this sort. Another of them is the idea of mutual aid. A jurisdiction has agreements with one or more jurisdictions nearby that if they are hit by an emergency, the other jurisdictions will send help. This is done in the United States in the fire service. I suspect you do the same thing here. So there are ways of covering this. This slide actually is a duplication of the one before. I apologize. So surge capacity is an issue that all of us, whatever country, have been thinking through because we recognize the phenomenon that was pointed out this morning that disasters are getting more frequent and they seem to be getting bigger. And as a result of that, we need capacities that we hadn't thought about before. Another issue, my third issue, is what we call situational awareness. And that is simply, do we know enough about what's going on in a disaster situation that will let us make good decisions and cope with the conditions of the disaster, even though there may be great uncertainty or even chaos going around the scene. It is well known that in these conditions, information is likely to be hard to get and frequently inaccurate. Communications lines are going to be disrupted. Cell phone networks that we depend on increasingly are likely to fail, either from overload or damage to the towers. Even devices like satellite phones will not be sufficiently plentiful or in the right places, or conceivably won't even work. Some of the key staff on the site of the disaster may be injured or dead. That limited China's ability to know what happened in the Wenchuan earthquake. Transportation facilities are likely to be damaged, so it'll be hard to send observers in to see what's going on there. All of these things interfere with our ability to gather information and assimilate key facts and understand what we ought to do. In the military, this is called the fog of war, or the fog of battle, that our judgment is clouded by the fact that we don't have good intelligence, and indeed some military leading general in the United States a few years ago said something along the lines that 80% of what we learn on the first day of battle is likely to turn out to be wrong. Unfortunately, we don't know which 20% is right. So that there is a huge problem of getting good information. I think this is a fact that is well known in disaster circles, and that many jurisdictions are beginning to think about ways of improving their ability to get information by developing backup systems of communications, interoperable telecommunications, thinking about how they could get people to the scene of an accident quickly with mobile transportation devices, etc. I think there are aspects of this problem that have not gotten quite as much attention. Let me call that to your attention. In China, when we've taught this, they have come to call this the four situationals, because we call each of them as a situational title to it. The first is situational awareness, which I've just mentioned, collecting and gathering information. The second is situational anticipation. It's not sufficient just to know what's happening now. What we want to do is use our information about what's